Hi everyone, welcome back to DUE 5012 Communicative English 3, Week 3 lesson with me, Puan Ida Muhammad Isa. The topic is description of charts and graphs. And the learning outcome, describe and analyze information contained in graphs and charts clearly and accurately based on a mini project. Let's recap week 2. Recognize lexical items in describing trends, movement, and distribution patterns in graphs and charts. So in week 2 lesson, you have learned the lexical items or the phrases that you can use to describe graphs. Each graph is described differently. And in interpreting graphs and charts, you look at the trends or the movement of the graphs and charts. A trend is generally and continuously tendency and what happened in most of the time. A trend can be seen clearly in graphs. It can be a continuous increase, a decrease, or consistency. The four basic trends are upward movement, downward movement, no movement, and change in direction. And pie charts are presented using percentages, fraction, proportion, or other expressions. In presenting a bar graph, you can use the expressions, for example, fractionally higher, marginally lower, slightly higher, a little lower, somewhat lower, considerable higher, substantially lower, a great deal higher, far lower, much lower, dramatically lower. So trends may happen at different pace and with different momentum, and it can be described using verb, noun, adjective, and adverbs. What's important is when you want to describe graph and chart, you know the trend and the suitable word to describe it. This lesson will describe how to use accurate information to present complicated information in a way that is accessible and understandable to your audience. When describing graph and chart, it's important to consider the best way to communicate information to your audience, especially if you plan to use data in the form of numbers, words, or images that will help to construct and support your argument. Generally speaking, data summaries may take the form of text, table, or figures. Most people are familiar with textual summaries, and this is often the best way to communicate simple results. A good rule of thumb is to see if you can present your result clearly in a sentence or two. If so, a table or figure is probably unnecessary. But if your data are too numerous or complicated to be described adequately in this amount of space, charts and graphs can be the effective way of conveying a lot of information without cluttering your text. Additionally, charts and graphs serve as quick references for your reader and can reveal trends, patterns, or relationships that might otherwise be difficult to understand. So the first aspect of charts and graph is using the accurate label, titles, and legend. And next, recognizing and use sentence structure to describe trends, movement, and distribution patterns in the graph and charts. This is a quote by Gloria M. Russell. Writing skills can be developed through practice. True ease in writing comes from art and not chance. So when it comes to presenting and explaining data, charts, graphs, and diagrams, you should help people to understand and memorize at least the main points from them. As the use of cases, diagrams and other visual perfectly fit for describing trends, making a comparison, or showing relationship between two or more items. In other words, you take your data, give it a visual, and effectively explain to people about the important information. So the main function of chart are to display data to further explain about a topic. When making your chart, think about the specific information that you want your data to support or the outcome that you want to achieve, and describe it would require the correct sentence structures by identifying the trends, the movement, and distribution patterns in the visual presented. So these are some tips to interpret information in graphs and charts. You should put in your mind that you're telling your audience about the graph that you're presenting. So firstly, you need to look at the graph and understand it. What kind of graph is it? Is it a bar graph, pie chart, or table? Then you need to skim the chart. And when you're skimming, look at the chart and identify what is the suitable title for the chart. What's the controlling idea or the main point of the chart? For example, the age of student. And next, analyze the data. Take note of the measurement and values presented. And lastly, formulate the suitable sentence structure to describe the graph. If you can follow these steps, then it will make a difference when you are describing your graphs in chart. How to recognize and introduce the title for the chart. Once you create a graph for your presentation, it is time to know how you want to describe the graph. Identify what type of graph and write it down in full sentence, the title of the chart. For example, the pie chart shows the number of students in JKE department. To catch your audience attention from the very beginning, you can use the following phrases for introduction. Let me show you this bar graph. Let's turn to this diagram. I'd like you to look at this visual of a pie chart, a line graph, or a bar graph. This graph illustrates, show, display. Let's have a look at this pie chart. If you look at this bar graph, you will understand. To illustrate my point, let's look at some charts. For example, the bar graph shows the departmental saving. The line graph shows the Red River discharge rate at Fargo Station. The bar graph shows or indicates children's happiness based on candy allowances. The bar graph shows people's enjoyment of different candy types. The pie chart indicates percent of cotton candy sales based on age. Next, recognizing the controlling idea. Identifying the general idea of your chart or graph. You should know what are the categories that are in your graph. What is the data about, or what is the general trend that is displayed. These visual aids provide summaries or can illustrate a complex process. So understanding how to read them is an efficient way to learn the material. So when graph, pay attention to what clues about the illustration you can gain from the general description. Labels. Look at the labels. Can you define or describe the item labels? So what kind of graph is required? That the information. What do the title, the key, the axis, label, sectors tells you? Look at what are the major changes or differences that you can see from the graph. And phrases that you can use. The chart shows, remain constant, more or less, overall, nearly twice, reached to peak, or you can say the trend is an increasing trend, decreasing trend, or constant data. Right? So what is the general trend indicated from the whole graph that is displayed? After you have recognized the controlling idea, next, you further describe your graph and chart by analyzing the data, the trend, or the important key that you want to convey to your audience. So indicate significant information from the chart by using correct and accurate vocabulary to show the change or value of the data. You need to decide on the most clear and logical order to present the material. And line graph generally present information in chronological order. So the most logical order for you to write up the information would most probably from the earliest to the latest. Whereas bar graph and pie chart are organized in different ways. And so you need to decide on the organization of each one. For example, a pie chart is usually we are looking at the majority or the minority values, the highest or the lowest. Similarly to bar graph, in making comparison, we are looking at the bigger value comparing it to the lower value. So what are the reasons for changes, differences you describe? What are the main points, aspect you get from the chart? And the phrases that you can use. If you can compare the figure 4 and you can see this bar graph show an increase, a decrease, a steady growth, a slight rise of value in. So in analyzing the data, you must note on the trend or the important key points. Here are some useful phrases to describe pie chart. In analyzing it, you can see the slices of the pie chart compare the chart is divided into parts. A has the largest number of percentage. B has the second largest number of or percentage. More than percentage, only 1/3 or less than half. Once you identify the controlling idea and the analysis of your graph and chart, you can formulate the sentence structures to describe the graph. It is best that you prepare the outline of your description before you state or before you present your graphs and chart to your audience. So, in formulating the sentence structure, introduce the graph and chart. So state the title of the bar chart. For example, this bar chart shows the number of students who prefer eating at the canteen. Right. Then you construct your analysis. For example, identifying the highest and the lowest number of data. Make comparison of data. Use phrases such as substantially lower, somewhat lower, higher than, and others. For example, the number of students that prefers eating at the canteen is substantially higher than the number of students who prefer eating outside of the campus, with the percentage of 70%. And in ending your description, state the main trends or changes. For example, overall, we can see that majority of the students prefer to get food in Polytechnic Merlimau Melaka. Let's look at an example of sentence structure. Start by saying exactly what the chart shows. Then describe the changes that you can see. Use the data and numbers from the bar graph. Next, compare the information. talk about the similarities or differences between the group that you can see. And lastly, conclude by saying what the main trends or changes are. For example, the bar chart illustrates the number of men and women studying engineering at Australian universities between the year 1992 and 2012 at 10-year intervals. It can be seen that the number of male students fell slightly from 14,000 in 1992 to 12,000 in 2002, and they remained level through the following decade. The number of female students is relatively low, starting at 2,000 in 1992. However, while the number of men decreased, the number of women increased. Female students grew steadily by 2,000 each decade. This led to a rise in the total number of engineering students from 16,000 to 18,000 in this period. Men continue to make up the majority of students. However, the proportion of female students increased sharply in this period. In 1992, there was one woman to even 7 men, but by 2012, this had narrowed to 1 woman to every 2 men. Overall, we can see a clear upward trend in the number of female engineering students in Australian universities, while the number of male students seems to have leveled off. Using connective words in your presentation would help to present effectively. These are some phrases that you can use to show connection in your data. The graph shows, the graph represents, as can be seen from the graph, as indicated by the graph. However, in contrast, in comparison, after, before, until, in sum, to sum up, in concluding, in conclusion, from the graph, it can be safely concluded that, we are safe in concluding that. Next, vocabulary. In presenting, you should use a variety of sentence structures and words. So be diverse in word classes, the usage of verbs, nouns, adjectives, and adverbs. Avoid repetition of data. Describe the difference between the two levels and describe the end point. You can use preposition by, of, or to, and express approximation appropriately. That's all for the lesson today. Thank you for watching. I hope that it will be useful for you in describing graphs and charts. And if you like the content, give me a thumbs up and do subscribe to get the latest communicative English lesson. Thanks for watching again.